Welcome, Kevin Eby. Kevin is the author of several of his own books, including 5 Minutes in Nature, his journey to find deeper connection to the natural world. Kevin's publishing credits include National Geographic, BBC Earth, National Wildlife, Smithsonian, Outdoor Photographer, and Lonely Planet. His image of a bald eagle that stole a rabbit from a young fox was highlighted on network television and featured in newspapers from Austria to Australia. That image was also honored by the Audubon Society as one of the best images in 2019 and named by CNN as one of the pictures of the year. Kevin, we are so excited to have you today. Thank you for joining us and having a presentation of your newer photos today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be here and share some of my work with the 5 Minutes in Nature project, which is the current book and exhibit series that I'm working on. And the 5 Minutes in Nature project is all about helping people take notice of the beauty that's around them every day. I think a lot of times we kind of put nature in a box. You think that nature is the brief period of time, when you get to take your 2 week vacation and go to Grand Canyon or Yosemite. But the fact of the matter is there's beauty outside my window right now, and it it's amazing like how much you can see when you just open your eyes to it. And so I want to share some images from the project and share also like some of the exercises that I end up using to kind of get better in tune with my surroundings. And again, it's just amazing like how much you can see. So what I want to do is to show you a couple of images that are from a very short series that I had done. And they're all taken from the very same location. And I would like to you, as I'm showing you these images, to just kind of think about where you think these pictures might have been taken. So we've got a nice little scene here that, a tree showing the last of its blossoms, golden crowned kinglet kind of hanging out, looking for some food. Some lovely ice patterns, obviously taken after a cold spell, but then like catching a little bit of the golden light, as the sun is beginning to warm things up. Also here, kind of like a nice relief picture. A leaf had ended up on this ice, and the leaf had uh, finally blown away, but leaving its print behind. And again, just kind of think about, where these pictures might have been taken. And you might think, it was, maybe a pond or, a city park. Turns out, though, they're actually taken in this hot tub. The house came with a dilapidated hot tub, and it would fill up with water. And I ended up being able to get some fantastic images out of that. The hot tub now is gone, but obviously some great pictures came from this thing. And I like to point this out just to illustrate that beauty is wherever you find it, and there absolutely is beauty anywhere. As I was beginning my career in nature photography, actually, I didn't intend to start as an artist. I had worked as a journalist and was primarily a writer. And I had a chance to, be off early in the afternoon because my schedule had. I worked very early mornings and got off each day at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And I decided, these summers around the Seattle area are just amazing. I want to just kind of get out and see what there is to see, in the in the nice summer. And one of the places that I frequented was the Washington Park Arboretum in Seattle. And I would rent a kayak from a canoe from the University of Washington, and I was just stunned at just how many birds would come right up to you. That when you were on the water, nothing was afraid of you. You just were kind of stepping into this fantastic world where it was very relaxing, and it was just very different from the uh, rapid pace that I was used to earlier in the day, and it was just like a great way to unwind and a great way to just step into something else. And over time, I realized that I really liked taking a camera along with me to just show, some of what I had seen as I was out and about. And that led to studying some art books to learn how to take better pictures. And none of these birds that I were seeing, were lifer birds. I mean, they're Canada geese and they're mallard ducks. But over time, I was able to find ways to sort of capture the personality, I think, of some of the wildlife that I had come in contact in these wonderful areas that, again, were just a few miles away from where I had spent the early part of the day in a cubicle. And this work ended up getting noticed by a couple of publications. One of them was PBS, which was doing a story on Edens that are in very urban areas, and the Seattle Arboretum was one of the ones that they wanted to feature. And they ended up seeing some of my pictures of the wildlife in the Arboretum and wanted to show that such an incredible nature sanctuary could exist just a stone's throw from a very large city. And this was one of my first publishing credits, was working with them to get some pictures of the Arboretum, both on TV and in their companion book. And as a result of that, then I realized that nature photography could actually be kind of a job for me. I really enjoyed going out and trying to find pictures and creating images that just showed how dramatic and wonderful nature was. And I did find some success with that, but I also noticed over time that my approach to being out in nature had changed dramatically. And one of the pivotal points for me where I really realized that was when I caught a lunar eclipse over Mount Rainier. The deal with a lunar eclipse is that they are extremely hard to photograph with the landscape. Most of the lunar eclipses that I'd ever seen were in the middle of the night. And so while you can photograph the moon, it's way, way, way over your head, and there's no way to combine it with the land below, just because of the difference in where it is in the sky, but also just because of the light. The moon, even though it was in eclipse, was still brighter than the land, which wasn't then lit by anything. And there was a chance to get the lunar eclipse with Mount Rainier. It was one of the rare lunar eclipses around here where the moon was going to eclipse right as the sun was setting. And so the moon was not going to be much higher than Mount Rainier, and I could get it with Mount Rainier bathed in the very last light of day as the moon was in total eclipse above it. And for this picture, I ended up doing a bunch of research. I knew, just because of the timing of the eclipse, that there was an opportunity to create a great landscape photo. But what I ended up doing was having topographical maps out and figuring out where the moon exactly was going to climb on the horizon. And then I found an angle where I could get it totally lined up with Mount Rainier. But also, one of the deals is when the moon is rising at sunset, you have to make sure that you're far enough back so that way the angle of the moon is enough to clear the mountain. And so it used some of the geometry that I learned back in high school to figure out exactly how far I needed to be. And the result was I got a really nice photo. The moon rose exactly where I thought it was going to rise in the sky. I got the picture that I thought I was going to get. And once I did that, I turned the camera off and put everything in the bag and started to head back home. Like, all of this preparation that I had done had totally paid off, and I got my shot. And I grabbed a fast food hamburger on my way back home, and that was that. And looking back now, I see that was so different, that experience, from what had actually prompted me to get into nature photography to begin with. When I got into nature photography, it was because I wanted to see what was around the corner and what there was to see. And I wanted to spend time with things and get totally immersed in the experience and be surprised sometimes by the thing that I found. And here was a very spectacular lunar eclipse with a very majestic mountain. And, I was just executing a plan that I had created on paper. And, looking back now, I wish I would have spent more time out there. I can think of millions of photos that I could have taken. This was in a park. I got this photo in a park near Enumclaw, or Eatonville rather, where there were some madrona trees that had peeling bark, and I could have gotten this lovely trunk that had some red color in it that would have matched the moon. And again, tons of regrets for just going through and executing the plan that I had come up with that night. Even though it was a good picture, it was just I wasn't totally immersed in the experience as I had been before. But thankfully, there were some events in my life that then helped me kind of get back to what had prompted me to love nature photography so much in the first place. And what one of those events was going to Iceland. So, as a nature photographer, a lot of my work involved creating images that would end up getting used in textbooks, but also travel guides. And I had an opportunity to travel around Iceland to create some landscape images right as tourism was beginning to expand a lot in the early 2000s. And I had approached this trip to Iceland the same way that I had approached the picture of the lunar eclipse over Mount Rainier. I had a ton of plans. I had a gigantic manila folder filled with research of every place that I could get a sunrise and sunset. And I'd actually planned everything out on a calendar for the entire time that I was there because I wanted to make the best use of my time and make sure that I'd come back with as many images as I possibly could. So this was an image that I got the first night. There are these old lava fields that are not far out of the city of Reykjavik, and I got a nice, stunning sunset. The problem was that was the very last time on that trip that I saw the sun. The weather, the rest of the time, was absolutely terrible. It was just, dark skies and rain and freak snowstorms. And when you think about it, my job at this time is to create images that go into travel guides and tour publications. That's what's ultimately paying my bills. And nobody's going to want to go to Iceland when this looks dark and dreary. And, so for the first couple of days of this dark and dreariness, I was kind of cursing my luck. But then I saw that there was really no end in sight to this weather, that this was the hand that I was dealt. And you're faced then with a choice. I mean, you can either just feel terrible that you've invested all this money and time coming there to try to make something happen that just absolutely was not going to happen, or you could try to just see what was there. And I decided to toss the vanilla folder of research in the back of the rental car and never saw it again. And I just began to look around. And one of the first things that I saw was this scene, which was off the northern coast of Iceland. This was the middle of May, and it was suddenly snowing hard right as the tide was coming out of this black sand beach. And I just love these swooping patterns. So you got to see all of this gorgeous white snow combined with a little bit of the blue of the Arctic Ocean and some of this black sand beach. And it was just a spectacular pattern. And the thing for me was once I began to see that, and I spent a half hour photographing this. I was just so amazed by, these just gorgeous patterns. Again, something that I could not have planned. It was just something that happened to be there, and I was in the right place at the right time. Once you begin to see some things like this, you see it everywhere. It just like it opens some floodgates. And that wonderful trip to Iceland ended up being a wonderful trip where I got a lot of images that weren't necessarily going to go in travel guides because there were more abstract or of more close-ups of nature, but I actually was able to incorporate them in other books and in some museum exhibits. And to this date, it's some of the work that I'm most proud of. But that experience also carried with me after I got back home. I had another chance to photograph at Mount Rainier. In the summer months around here, you can get to the core of the Milky Way with the mountain at on certain nights, and it's not like this was getting the Milky Way with Mount Rainier. It's not like that was a picture that had never been taken before, but I just wanted to get out, and I figured that that was a good use of my time to just go out there and see what I could get on that night. Thing was, is even though the weather forecast had called for cleared skies that night, when I actually got up there, there was anything but clear skies. There was these clouds that were right at the summit of the mountain, kind of extending every which direction and blocking the core of the Milky Way. And this was again, one of those one of those times where you could either just sort of curse your luck, like, oh my gosh, why did I, was I so unlucky to travel all this way up here and get nothing? But I realized that those clouds were spectacular, and it was catching some of the far distant city lights, so they had like this really nice red glow. And so what I ended up doing was I grabbed my camera and took up running up a trail to where I could kind of line up some clouds and some trees and whatnot to create an image that really kind of made use of those clouds. And I realized that, this was an image that I could not have planned from home, but it was an image that actually means a lot to me. I grew up in Puyallup, and I could see Mount Rainier out the dining room window, every day where it was clear. And so this mountain was just hugely important to me. It's also, one of my first memories being out in nature was being a young kid, and my parents had taken me up to Paradise at Mount Rainier, and was maybe 4 at the time. And I just remember, starting up from the parking lot and just thinking, wow, I could just climb this mountain, because it felt so close. And, I was so young then that I didn't realize, how tall that was, or what an undertaking that would have been, and how I would not have actually been able to do that. But it's just the mountain has always been something that was so important to me, and what I was ending up able to create with this picture, just because of the serendipity of these clouds, was the clouds connecting the mountain with the heavens. And I got a picture that actually feels like what Mount Rainier feels like to me. And there were a lot of other people who were in the parking lot at sunrise that night, hoping to get the Milky Way with the mountain. And they ended up just turning it kind of into a photo club meeting where they just sat around and, well, we didn't get the shot that we were at. And, so they didn't end up taking photos that night. And I ended up getting one of the best pictures of my career, one of my favorite images of Mount Rainier. And it's not like one choice was right or the other, but just being able to open your mind to the beauty that's around you ends up opening up a lot of possibilities that you could never even imagine. What I would like to do is kind of give you like some of the techniques that I use to try to live in the moment more, and kind of cut out some of the clutter that gets in your head and prevents you from seeing what's there. And a great example of this was my experience at Niagara Falls. I was in the area because I had some images in a museum. And because I was there, I wanted to see Niagara Falls. It features very prominently in a lot of art that had inspired me. There's a very famous painting of Niagara Falls by Frederick Edwin Church that I was blown away by the first time that I got to see it on the walls of the National Gallery in DC. And it was one of the reasons that I wanted to see Niagara Falls in person. And, so I figured I want to see Niagara Falls and make an image of my own there. And the problem is this is one of the most majestic waterfalls, but it was surrounded by development. And as I was driving out to the falls, I just felt a lot of sadness over what was around it. You ended up driving past a lot of neon businesses. One of them was the House of Frankenstein. And when you ended up at the rim of the Niagara Falls, you ended up seeing a video ad for a casino. So as the water was falling, you saw like a roulette wheel spinning in the background. And I just felt, this was a place that I thought was just like such incredible nature, but I was having trouble seeing the nature because of all of the man-made activity around. But what I ended up doing was using an exercise, a grounding exercise that I had been taught in journalism school by a professor, my professor Cliff Rao, who wanted to help us learn how to, when you're doing a story, take note of like some of the little details that can help bring things to life. And what he ended up doing was he made us do an assignment and we could pick whatever activity that we wanted to do, but we started by saying, right now I see, and then you fill up the page with what you see at that given moment. So at Niagara Falls, what I ended up seeing was, a waterfall that was so powerful that all this mist was rising from it. And I saw this beautiful green blue color. And the waterfall was curved, sort of like a horseshoe. And so it was never able to be lit entirely by the sun at any one time, just because of the way that the angles had gone. And so I was going through this exercise on my own at the edge of Niagara Falls. And, after you exhaust all the things that you see, right now I hear. And so then I thought about all the things that I would hear. And one of the things that was really surprising to me as I was going through that was, while there was so much development that I was driving by on the way to the waterfall, when I was actually there on the rim, the force of the waterfall was so loud that you couldn't hear it. You couldn't even hear the cars going by, even though if I had turned around, the road actually was very much visible. And again, the next step, you're going through all your senses here. Right now, I feel. One of the things I distinctly remember feeling was, the mist touching my cheeks, and it's just like you kind of got kissed on the cheeks by these cold water droplets. And again, it kind of helped me feel like I was connected to this waterfall, because you're on the observation deck and you don't feel like necessarily you're in the waterfall, but when you open up your senses and really concentrate, you can actually feel the mist of the waterfall on your cheek, even if you don't see it right in front of your eyes. Right now, I smell. One of the things that I vividly remember was kind of being able to smell the cleanliness and the minerals of the water. It just like had a kind of a distinct, refreshing scent, after you really concentrated on it. And then finally, taste. Taste for me, well, there was a Tim Hortons restaurant right behind, and so I could kind of almost taste the hash browns and coffee there. So doesn't all necessarily end up being nature related, but just going through this exercise does kind of help open all of your senses to allow you to see things that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And the result of this was this photo. And it's a photo that I never would have thought of had I not actually gone through this entire exercise and realized what Niagara Falls had meant to me. And what I had realized, after going through this exercise was, you hear all of this force, but I saw a lot of birds that were kind of darting in and out of the mist and, getting their wings lightly wet. And so this thing looked like it was incredibly forceful, but there was this mist that actually was kind of gentle. And I remember thinking just about how enamored I was about the colors and how this waterfall was so big and so curved, not all of it would catch all of the same sunlight at the same time. And so I ended up creating this picture right at sunrise, where the first light of day is lighting up the mist in the waterfall, but not the water behind it. And it's an image that I was very proud of, and I don't know that anybody else would think of it. That's not to say that they're wrong, but what I'm saying is that this is a picture that was very unique to my experience, and it's an experience that I had because I had gone through this exercise of really trying to focus in on what was in front of me and what was I experiencing, and trying to see things that I didn't necessarily see at first glance. And when you kind of open that gate, it's amazing how much more you see. So this was from a tree that was in my yard. During COVID, I actually had much more time to sort of explore the yard. And when I was wandering around, I noticed these holes that were drilled in the trunk, and I immediately knew what they were. These were holes that were drilled by a bird called a red-breasted sapsucker. It's very meticulous in terms of drilling these sap wells. A lot of times, these wells are almost drilled like the holes in the Battleship game. And I kind of chuckled because I didn't realize that there was a red-breasted sapsucker that was using the property. I had once traveled all the way to the Seattle Arboretum, trying to get a photo of that bird because that was a place that I knew I could get a photo of one. And here was evidence that one was right outside my front door. And after seeing this evidence of it, I spent a better part of a couple of months trying to be out there at various times to see if I could actually catch the sapsucker at work. And I was finally able to see it. And I ended up creating this picture to illustrate the experience a little bit. The sapsucker is backlit by the late afternoon sun, so what you see is just this rim of light around it. And I liked the idea here of this was a bird that had been hiding in plain sight for me, it had been hiding in the shadows, and it had been there all along. And I finally got to see it. And after I saw it the first time, I was able to see it actually quite often. Eventually, it kind of got to the point that it realized I was not a threat, and so I got to watch it drill its holes and feed. And I ended up creating a small project of sapsucker images just from its entire summer that it had spent in the tree. It even had raised a couple of young, and one of my favorite memories of this project was late in the season, it had actually brought its two young chicks down on the trunk to where I could see them. And then it had kind of gone back up into the tree. And it was just a very, very special experience that if I hadn't been aware of what was in my own yard, I never would have seen it because it was hidden behind, thick foliage. And it's just stunning to me, like that this was going on 20 feet from my door, something that I was very much interested in, but I was so busy doing everything else that I didn't take the time to notice that was there. And after discovering the sapsucker was there, I realized that was why there were so many hummingbirds here. I was so proud of myself for having all these hummingbird feeders out in the yard, but it turns out that the hummingbirds were probably in the yard because they primarily feed on the sap that is coming in these wells that the sapsucker had drilled. And so I also then created some images of hummingbirds that were feeding at these sapsucker wells. And so being aware of what was going on around me and noticing those tiny the holes in the life that was going on in this tree helped me realize what an ecosystem my yard actually had become. Another way that I kind of help focus through these mindfulness exercises is illustrated through this photo, which was I had created at the northern coast of France in an area called Étretat, where some of the Impressionist painters had created some of the paintings of sea arches. There are three famous sea arches there that painters like Monet had painted several times, and I wanted to see them with my own eyes because I had been inspired by their work. And one of the things that had jumped out at me when I was on the cliff looking down at this arch, which is called Manaport, was the sense of scale, which you don't necessarily get from some of the paintings. And I had realized that as I was watching the waves come through this arch and slam against the shore, this area was huge because I could see the waves crash, and then you would hear the sound of it, a second or so later. And what I ended up doing was creating an image that then I turned into black and white to try to emphasize that uh, it's not always about sight being the primary sense, that sometimes taking a deeper look and experiencing some other senses is what the picture actually is about. And here's another great example of a picture that I'd created in New York, where sound was actually the primary experience that resulted in this image. The 5 Minutes of Nature project was shown at the Roger Tory Peterson Museum in New York. Peterson was the father of the modern bird guide. He was an incredible painter who ended up creating paintings of birds in various stages to help people identify them. And I was wandering around in the woods near the museum as I was working on preparing the exhibit and trying to figure out exactly what it was going to be like. And when I was in these woods, I just heard birds all over the place, but you couldn't see anything because they were so high in the canopy. But I just thought this was such a wonderful place that I made an image showing this little trail, but then also this dense forest. And I later learned that these were the very same woods that Peterson had spent an entire summer surveying before he had created his very first bird guide. And so then this image got to be part of that exhibit. But again, this is an image that was, even though this is a picture and visual, the experience that primarily is behind this was audio, sound. Sometimes, in order to broaden my horizons, I try to give myself some assignments. And this was an assignment where I tried to see how many different colors I could put into one photo. And just having this as a frame of being in my mind, there was this spectacular tree just down the street from where I live, where for about a week at the beginning of fall, this one tree ends up showing all the shades of autumn. The top part of the tree starts to change colors, later, and so you're almost able to sort of get like this little rainbow effect. And it's a tree that I'd always kind of enjoyed seeing as I was driving home from an errand, but giving myself the assignment to just try to see how many colors I could get into a photo finally gave me the nudge to stop one day and try to see if I could make a picture of it. And the opposite also works, is trying to see what you could do with just one color. And that's what I did with this image here. When you ask a kid what color a tree is, I mean, they tell you green. But the thing is it's the answer. The truth is more interesting than that simple answer of green. There are bright greens and dark greens, and it turns out that the shades of green are actually highly dependent upon how much sunlight that part of the tree gets, or how much light that tree gets. Trees that are in deep shade or tend to be very, very dark, so that way they can absorb the most sunlight. Leaves that are more fragile or much more exposed to the sun tend to be brighter, so they can reflect a lot of that away. And when you try to just see what you can do with just green, then it helps you see, wow, there is so much variation to green even in just this one forest. And the idea of just one color helped inspire me to spend time with this tern, which I found in the Cook Islands. I loved just the pure white color of it, and was able to get it flying against a cloudy sky. And in order I wanted to get this very simple, minimalistic picture of this angelic bird against this white background. And what I ended up having to do was kind of learn the route that this bird would take from the feeding grounds into its nesting site, and I was able to position myself under it and shoot straight up at the bird as it was flying over my head. And a lot of times in nature photography, they tell you there's never a photo straight over your head. And they're not always photos straight over your head, but that also doesn't mean that there never are either. And this ended up being an image from the Cook Islands that also means a lot to me. One of the other things that I try to remind myself of is to take pictures of concepts that are sometimes hard to explain visually. And one of those ideas is this idea of time. So, any picture is a representation of a split second of time, but what does time itself look like? And this is from the north rim of the Grand Canyon in an area called Toroweeb. And the idea of time is fairly readily evident here. What you see is this river that, over the course of a few million years, has carved its way down this canyon, resulting in a very steep canyon. If you look at the edges of it, you can see layers of sediment that have actually formed this land, and each of those layers is actually a different piece of time. And so this is not just a simple representation of Grand Canyon. This is, for me, a picture of time and millions of years of history. But you don't always need millions of years of history or clear geology. This was another picture of time. This was an image that I had created in Montana a few years ago. And I had spent the day in Yellowstone National Park, but then was just kind of exploring things that were just outside of the park boundary. And I came across this wonderful river. And one of the things that I had realized fairly quickly was that I was looking at time. These aren't just icicles. What they are is a record of temperature over the past several days. So the icicles began to form when the temperature got just above freezing and melting some of the snow and ice that were hanging over the riverbanks. But then at night, the temperature would drop again, and splashes from the creek would end up freezing then to the bottom of these progressively longer icicles, creating like this really cool bell bottom effect. So what you see is, in this one picture, days of freezing and thawing with temperatures just right above and below the freezing mark. So they kind of look like an hourglass, and it is sort of an hourglass. I also like to think in terms of like very long-term history. One of the projects that I've been working on looks at the cycle of water from the ocean into the clouds, into the ice caps, and all the way back to the sea. And as I was in Ohio, I found this river scene, and as I was looking at it, I was just thinking about, I wonder if in the history of the earth, if how much of the water that is running through this creek right now had ever been through that creek before. And had this water been as part of like a polar ice cap at one time, and just helping to force myself to kind of think in terms of some of these bigger ideas, then helped me calm down and take time to appreciate the magnificent scene that was in front of me, and create something that was more expressive rather than just a simple piece of a simple section of the creek. But what I decided to end up doing there was creating a little bit of a picture of an ecosystem about how this water then is also supporting this forest, and kind of illustrating some of that cycle. This is also a picture of time, changing seasons. And this is one that was taken in my own backyard. This was taken after I have juncos that nest in the backyard every year here. And this was right after the young had successfully left the nest. And the scene isn't really about emptiness of early autumn leaf had fallen and had perfectly landed into this nest, and it just kind of like shows this cycle that the young had used this nest successfully and were now on their own little life's adventures and hopefully succeeding as they're finding their own territories, but also that there is sort of this cycle of life that after summer comes the fall, and all of these seasons have their own charms and are part of the circle of life. I do like to. I think there's a risk with wildlife photography where people try to anthropomorphize, and it's up to you if you want to give animals names and try to assign some human behavior to them. It's not something that I do, but as I was looking at this female barred owl, I was thinking about what she might be thinking. And she had successfully raised two young owls that were now successfully flying around this park. And she had ended up perching in a tree that was not far from me. And she was watching her young fly around the park from branch to branch successfully. And as I was kind of thinking about, all that was going around with this owl family, I realized that her young had kind of graduated from one stage of their development, and so I decided to create a picture of her that was sort of like a high school yearbook portrait style. And this idea only came to me because I was thinking in terms of not just here's a picture of an owl, but trying to spending an hour thinking about what was going on, and what their lives were like for the prior 2 months and what was also ahead of them. This is a picture of two puffins that I had got in Iceland, and this was another image that resulted from me thinking about what do these animals go through? What are their lives like? And puffins are animals that spend precious little time on land. The vast majority of their lives, about 9 months of which, are spent alone and at sea feeding, and they only come to land during the summer months to breed. And while they are monogamous, but they only see their mate during this breeding season. And I had hiked out to the edge of this bird cliff with a giant 600 millimeter lens that weighed 14 pounds. And what I had found when I had gotten to the edge of the cliff was birds that weren't afraid of me. The 600 millimeter lens was way too powerful. In fact, one of the puffins had approached the lens and climbed actually into the lens hood, which was quite comical, and I wasn't able to get a shot at all. But then I kind of stepped back and looked at the scene around me, and what you would see is all these burrows that were on the cliffs, and puffins reuniting and beginning to raise their new family at the beginning of this season. And I thought this was kind of a tender moment, a quick moment of these two birds being reunited after being apart for 9 months. And I like to also think in terms not just of looking at a solitary animal, but also also as it relates to its community and as part of an ecosystem. And each one of those three things is valid and gives you a totally different view depending upon what you focus on that given moment. And snow geese are beautiful by themselves. I love the white color. But what I had decided to do was try to create a picture that illustrated this giant community of snow geese, where there are tens of thousands that congregate in the Skagit Valley of Washington State over the course of the winter. And I used a longer exposure to just show how these birds land together and forage together. And this really is a sense of community over the course of a winter. And this is a totally different picture than would have happened if I had just thought in terms of finding just one bird, looking at a bird as an individual, or even trying to explore the ecosystem as a whole. This image was a result of a piece of trivia. This is a picture of a Hawaiian stilt, and this is a bird that has sets a world record. It has the longest legs in proportion to its body size. And so when I saw this bird in Maui, what I ended up doing was using the reflection of the water to accentuate the length of the legs, because you can't really see the full length of the legs when the bird is waiting anyway. But it was just like this idea of knowing a piece of trivia about it, and then being mindful of these very long legs and trying to think of, well, what can I do with that, helped me create an image that I wouldn't have thought of had I just gone out and decided, oh, there's a bird, I'm just going to take a quick picture of it. In the world of nature photography, a lot of photographers try to silo themselves either into wildlife or into landscapes, and I don't like to do that. I find both being equally valid. It's not an either or for me. It's everything fits together, and that spirit actually resulted in this picture. I was up in the Skagit and saw these short-eared owls flying. But what had really interested me that morning was the contrast between the golden light of the sky just before the sun had rose, and the wonderful purples of some of the foothills that were in shadows. And so I wanted to create like this image that was golden on the top and this purple on the bottom, and then saw an opportunity to get two of these short-eared owls in flight, and I was able to get a frame where one was in one section and one was in the other. And for me, this was a great example of how wildlife and landscape can come together to create something that was better than just a landscape or better than just a wildlife photo. For me, any first picture that I take is a first draft, and I love spending time trying to see how many different kinds of photos that I can make with one subject. And I had spent some time documenting these crows that roost in Bothell, Washington. And for a time, there were 15,000 crows that would roost every night over the course of the winter months. And I spent 3 to 4 months one year going out several nights a week, documenting them coming into the roost every night. So this was one of the pictures that I got. This is not a picture I would have taken if it would just been the first time that I'd ever done this, because this was a very, very wide angle lens, 11 millimeters. Normally, you'd only use this for architecture when you're trying to fit, an entire building into a scene. But for me, I didn't need a close-up picture of a crow. I'd already gone through and made some of those, and I was trying to figure out something to do that was different. And using that unique perspective that was afforded to me with that lens allowed me to create, this dynamic image of a lot of the crows coming up over the Sammamish River. I also was able to create a long exposure image where you actually see the crows kind of flying into their roost. And so you get this sort of mix of very sharp images of crows that are on the trees because they've already settled, and then images of crows that are in motion. And then one other idea I had was to get crows that were actually on the roost, and I'd used flash. I don't use flash for all animal images. A lot of animals, it's not great to use, and it can affect their hunting and whatnot. Crows, they don't mind. And I was also far away from them, so this wasn't blinding them. This is actually a weird camera effect that exists when a flash is placed right next to your lens. The light from the flash ends up going into the bird's eyes and straight back into the lens. It's like the old red eye effect that we used to have when we took flash photos of people years ago. And this just created a really cool effect of the birds, seeing them again in sort of a different light. And I think one of the greatest things that you can ever give yourself is the gift of time. And while I've been sharing some ideas for how to focus, just spending time helps you see more than you could otherwise. I had noticed this pied-billed grebe. She was raising some young in wetlands in the Union Bay area, and I'd spent an afternoon watching her. This was a very unusual nest. She didn't have a mate, and it looked like several of her other babies had died. She had just one left, and she was trying to feed it all by herself. And so I saw her venture out, fish, and then the baby would hop off the nest and she would feed it, and then she would go back out and hunt. And I watched the cycle replay several times until one time she was taking a long time to hunt. And the young chick had climbed off of the nest in search of her. And this chick was so small. A breeze had kicked up, and it had blown this young bird way off course and into the blackberries at the edge of this pond. And the chick's mother was not anywhere around. She was off hunting in a different part of the pond. And when she came back, the chick was nowhere to be found. I couldn't see the chick anymore because it was hidden behind this very thick rough brush. And you didn't know if the chick had survived or if they were ever going to be reunited. And so I'd spent an hour or two just waiting to see what was going to end up happening. And turns out one of the most amazing things ended up happening. The mother had ended up finding the chick, and the young bird had climbed up onto the back of her nest. And just being out there for several hours and witnessing this entire story kind of helped me create a picture that looked like this, where you're not trying to get as close to the bird as you possibly can. I wanted to show, how this mother and this baby were all alone by themselves in this vast area. And I also wanted to show that, the young bird was totally tuckered out here. You can just, see it finally relaxing with its head on its mother's shoulder. I also finally got a chance to redo an eclipse experience. In fact, just this past week. So I started by telling you about how, a lunar eclipse was when I kind of realized that I was not as living in the moment as I would like to be. Well, I got to live in the moment with a solar eclipse in Spain last week. And this is a picture of totality. You get to see the prominence coming off of the left side of the image. If you look really close, there are some prominences as well in the top and the left side. But I absolutely enjoyed every moment of this eclipse. And I got to spend about an hour and a half looking at it in various stages. This was the image that I had hoped to create. This was a rare solar eclipse where I was able to be there as the eclipse was happening at sunset, which allowed me to combine the eclipse with a landscape. And so you got to see some of the mountains of the Catalan region of Spain. But that wasn't just the only thing that I took note of. As the sun was getting into eclipse, there were some clouds that were moving around, and I got to see some birds that were moving into their area. And even after the eclipse, I got to enjoy, seeing the sun come out of the eclipse and look like it was a crescent as it was beginning to dip behind the mountains. And I was still interested in the scene after the sun had set, and I was enjoying the golden colors of twilight on the landscape. And so it was wonderful just being kind of the mindset to just give myself, the time to, experience all of the various stages of the eclipse and the sunset and, the unique things that each of those had to offer. And the old ugly hot tub is gone from my yard, replaced with wonderful wildflowers, which have also created, just a great tableau for me to photograph. And it's different all the time. Earlier in the season, I had rabbits that were munching on the flowers. Pollinators have made very strong use of the yard. I have seen several types of butterflies. And as the flowers have even grown in more dense, you can see butterflies trying to navigate their way through these very, very thick fields of this very thick patch of flowers, to collect their food. And what I really want to leave you with is this idea that, your nature experience is your own. And a rainbow is a great metaphor for this, because even if you were all together with a group of people looking at a rainbow on the horizon, everybody has actually seen a different rainbow. Your rainbow is formed at a 42-degree angle from where the anti-solar point, which would be, the shadow of your head. And for this picture, I was able to actually use that idea to move the rainbow, so that way it actually lined up with the cinder cranes on the Haleakala crater and on the island of Maui. So being able to move your rainbow allows you to create some great images. You don't have to just settle where the first place that you see it, but also it is a great metaphor for just everybody has their own rainbow. And I'm not suggesting, that people should plant the same things in their yard as I had planted here, or to go to the same places that I had photographed. There's beauty to be found everywhere, as long as you take your 5 minutes to notice it. And I encourage all of you to, use mindfulness exercises and give yourself the gift of free time to see the wonderful world around you. And I do want to thank you so very much for your time. And I think we can open it up to questions.
That's wonderful, Kevin. Thank you so much. I do have some questions that I wrote down here that folks have been asking. Jennifer asks, the moon behind Mount Rainier, do you focus on the mountain instead of the moon in order to make everything clear? How do you do that?
You only have to focus on the mountain, and the deal is that the mountain for me would have been 20 some miles away, so your camera is already focused at infinity, and so the basically everything that's a few miles away from your lens is already going to be in focus, both the mountain and the moon. And that's just one of the things that works very well when you're focusing on something, the moon, with also a very distant horizon.
Thank you. And Thomas was asking, can you talk about how you're using the verb make a photo and you're not really using capture or snap or shoot? Most people say shot this photo or snap this shot. And he says it kind of speaks to your artistry that you say making a photograph or taking a photo.
That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. So the idea is that there are a billion photos that are taken every day, and it's with smartphones generally. And I think that we live in a world where it is so easy to take photos that people just whip out a phone and snap a quick picture, and that's that. For me, making a picture is actually a process, and it is allowing myself to be attracted to something, like finding something that catches my interest, but then working through a process of trying to figure out what is it that captured my interest and why, and what elements should actually be in the viewfinder that express that interest, but then also don't provide so much clutter that it takes you away from the key point that I found interesting. And making a photo is a process, just like writing a poem or a book or a novel. I think just because photos are so easy to take, we don't necessarily treat them with the same respect that we did 50 years ago or 100 years ago, when you had to go up a mountain with a glass plate and be very deliberate about what you were doing to record a scene. And that's really what I mean about making a photo. It's not just pulling the camera out of a bag and aiming and snapping off a quick picture, but it's about really thinking about what it is before my eyes that is really calling to me. And then, as a painter would with, colors and brushes, thinking about, well, what elements of the scene in front of me should I be putting into the viewfinder to express that to somebody who's looking at the picture that I take.
Thank you. Nikki and Jennifer kind of asked something on the same line where do you ever like take images that you take and then like maybe turn them into black and white and see how that looks? Or just wondering how much editing goes into some of the work that you do.
So a lot of it is not, experimenting to see what would happen. A lot of it is really having an idea of what I want a particular photo to say. One of the things that I have to do a lot in the way that I'm presenting art now is you write a lot of artist statements. What is this photo about? What am I trying to communicate? And that process ends up after I go through it and really think about what this one picture really means to me, or what I'm trying to say, or what I hope that you notice about it. A lot of the answers to those questions help decide what is the best way to present the photo in order to get that across. In terms of editing, I don't like to do a lot of editing. I do some. My editing is sort of equivalent to what Ansel Adams would have done in the darker room. I do some work with contrast. I do like to selectively brighten and darken certain parts of the image to kind of help lead your eye to certain places that I would like to lead your eye to, because I think that that's what I found interesting, and I would like you to kind of see that as well. So there is some of using lightness and darkness and where that is to kind of guide your eye around. That kind of helps tell the narrative, but I'm not using Photoshop or AI in ways to create things that weren't there. It's more about kind of like these little subtle steps that you can take to kind of help kind of accentuate what I found interesting, or kind of guide your eye to what I hope you would notice or would not see otherwise.
I love it. We are at 7 o'clock, so if there are people who have to leave, that's totally understandable. We are going to continue with a few more questions, and this will be recorded, so you can check the rest of it out later if you need to go. So I feel like there's like I take a lot of pictures of things, and sometimes I get like 15 shots of what all looks the same. How do you end up choosing the one that you keep?
It again comes back to this idea of what I hoped you would notice. So over the course of the eclipse, the eclipse is a great example. I shot, the totality lasted only 90 seconds. But I ended up probably getting 10 or 15 pictures during that period of time. I noticed that there were still birds that were flying as the sun was in totality. So one of the frames that I had picked had a relatively clear bird that was passing by it, and that's kind of how I picked. If it's a landscape, sometimes I pick based on are there wildflowers that are getting blown around, and so this picture is a little bit sharper than another one, or maybe I actually like the blur, but maybe the blur actually is really interesting and kind of creates more of an impressionistic vibe, and maybe that's kind of what I'm after. So it really is being hyper aware of what it is that I really wanted to express with the picture, and then finding the one frame that has the elements that I was trying to use to bring that out.
Um, And so somebody asked if you do take a journal with you and write about like what you're taking pictures of to help you kind of remember what was going on during that time.
I wish I did, but I don't. The camera bag is already pretty full, and um, I generally have a pretty good memory of um, what I was thinking, just because taking the picture is such a process. There's a painter friend of mine who um, he uses an approach where he just doesn't know exactly what he's going to paint, but he wanders around in the woods and it just feels like something, like a painting is lurking around in some part of this forest. And that's kind of how I feel when I'm going out and photographing a lot of the time. I feel like, there's something that's calling to me, and there is a huge process that I go through where I make numerous drafts then of the picture, where you take like a first picture, but then revise and revise and revise until you kind of get this thing down to the core elements. And I just find that going through that process and creating that trail of iterative images kind of helps me remember what was really important to me about the whole experience.
Yeah, it does seem like you have a lot of equipment, and I imagine it can be kind of tricky to get all that equipment into kind of some of the remote places that
Mhm.
you're traveling to.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I'm sure there's a lot of decision making just in that alone.
And also getting older and not being able to carry it on your back. So,
Yeah. And it seems like you have to know a lot about the animals you're photographing, about their behavior and so forth. Do you also consider yourself a birder?
um, that is a good question. I think, a lot of birders are after a lot of different types of birds. And in that regard, I am not. What I am after is a really good experience. And I would rather spend, an afternoon with a common crow if, it was doing something interesting or was in a photogenic spot. I mean, that is a fantastic day for me. So I have read a lot about birding. I've been lucky to speak at a couple of birding conferences, about a project that I had done about documenting how bald eagles learn to fly. But in terms of like creating a lifelong list of birds that I had seen, or having a specific list of birds that I want to see, that's not what I do. I oftentimes, sort of treat birds and wildlife the same way that I do landscapes. Whatever's there is there, and you make the best of what you can with what you have.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that was our last. Wait, let's see. One person asked, have you seen the Ben Stiller movie, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, about a Life magazine photographer and the last cover of Life magazine?
Yes, yeah, I have, which is a fantastic movie. Like another, I wish I could think of the name of the movie, but there was also a photographer for the New York Times, Cunningham, who did fashion, which is another great example of like a great photographer mindset. It has absolutely nothing to do with nature or wildlife photography, but Cunningham was a fashion photographer who went around New York on his bicycle and had a small camera, and he would just take pictures of people on sidewalks, or coming out of restaurants that had wearing clothes that he thought were interesting. And he said, beauty is wherever you find it. And there is a movie about his life that is also really phenomenal, and that sort of idea also really speaks to kind of the mindset that I have with my nature photography. That um,
Yeah, I have a set of photographs from, or a set of postcards of Bill Cunningham photographs,
Mhm,
and it's just fantastic. Every photo is like a story on its own.
mhm.
Some folks were noticing the Muppets images in the background there. Are you a fan of the Muppets?
Absolutely, I absolutely love the Muppets. I grew up with them. When I was a kid, I loved watching the Muppet Show, and the thing about being a nature photographer is a lot of the work is done in the office, where you're writing proposals, or doing logistics for shows and stuff. And just having the Muppets around me makes me very happy when I'm locked in here and not outside with the flowers.
Oh, nice. This is wonderful. So, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to be announcing a few things that are coming up next. And but I just wanted to say everyone was very excited to have you here, and there were a lot of great questions and a lot of oohs and ahs, and we were very happy to see your wonderful photography. So thank you so much, and we've got links to your book and everything. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so some of our upcoming online featured events coming up are Debating the Constitution, Voting Rights, and that's on Thursday, August 20th from 3:30 to 4:30. Taking the Mystery Out of What to Read Next on Monday, August 24th, 6 till 7:30. And School Lunch Planning with Rosemary and Thyme, Friday, September 4th from 5 till 6. All right, thanks.